You guys are always asking me for my hot takes, which why do you guys want to cancel me so bad? So I asked you, what are your hottest takes about Parenthood? Oh, how the turntables. So today, you're canceled.
Well. How the turntables...
Just kidding. No, in all seriousness, I was going to rate these in terms of heat level. I was going to have a scale from this isn't really a hot take to this is maybe lukewarm to yeah, this is scalding hot. But you guys were actually so reasonable. I literally couldn't find a single genuinely hot take. Instead, I feel like I ended up with just an entire database of amazing parenting tips. It probably would have been very different if I'd asked a different community, of course, the people who are drawn to my channel are probably going to be kind of aligned in terms of values with me versus if I were to ask the estranged parent community, for example, their hot takes about parenthood, that might genuinely seem like a hot take to me. But still, I selected the ones that I thought I had the strongest reaction to, a mix of some that I agree with, some that I agree with a little bit less, so let's get into it. Hot take. Moving multiple times during childhood does a lot more damage than we are prepared to admit to a child's psyche. Most kids can make it through 1 or 2 moves, and they're generally okay if they're not leaving their school system, but dragging them across the country constantly for a parent's work is traumatic and causes a lot of issues with making and keeping long-term relationships. Yeah, I go back and forth on this one. Full disclosure, I already had a few major attachment ruptures by age 4, and I also moved across the world 3 times by age 10. And I really go back and forth on whether this was a strength or a stressor for me, and I've kind of come to the conclusion that it was both. So my parents were partly living in the UK and the US when I was very little, and I grew up with my grandparents and my cousins. That's why I always say my cousins are like siblings to me. And then when I was 4 years old, I joined my parents in the US in Danbury, Connecticut. Then when I was 6 years old, we moved to Cleveland, Ohio. And then when I was 10 years old, we moved to Atlanta, Georgia. That first move was obviously really scary. I didn't speak English when I first came to the US. It was a different culture. I went straight into preschool, had to sort of navigate the language barrier. I definitely have memories of it being, scary. The second move, I don't really remember. I think it was pretty smooth because I have great memories of Cleveland. I think it was a wonderful neighborhood that I was in, a wonderful place for, small children to grow up. And then the move to Atlanta was very difficult for me because I think I enjoyed my life in Cleveland. I didn't really want to move to Atlanta. I didn't really enjoy the South. I didn't like the heat. I didn't like their accents. And I also skipped 5th grade when we did that move. So that was an extra layer of just difficulty because you're going into it younger than everyone, less developed, less mature. So everyone kind of has an advantage in terms of socializing and making friends compared to you. These were also kids that had sort of grown up with each other since age 5. And so I was definitely the outsider coming in during a time when, people start to get really mean, start to kind of bully each other. So I almost wonder if the effect of the mood depends on how a child feels about the place where they're currently located, whether they have a strong sense of community, whether they like where they're going to be going, whether it's going to be a smooth fit for them. When I was younger, I used to say that I appreciate the fact that I moved around a lot because I think it made me more worldly and more adaptive as a person. But at the same time, I think it really ingrained in me this core belief that I'm a perpetual outsider. Everyone has these long-lasting relationships from years before I ever knew them, and I will never fully 100% fit in with people. So with all that said, I will definitely not be moving my children unless I have a very good reason to. Maybe just once, if necessary. We're moving in a couple months to a country where we hope to stay long-term, and if it's for some reason not a good fit, I would maybe move in 10 years, just one time. But maybe if there are any army kids or kids of traveling nurses who had to move around a lot when they were young, I'd love to hear their experiences in the comments as well. Now, on the topic of parenthood, one of my hot takes is that I only want my kids to play video games that help them develop some sort of skill. And as far as video games go, a really awesome one is the sponsor of today's video, June's Journey. June's Journey is a beautifully crafted hidden object mystery game set in the 1920s. It follows June Parker, a sharp amateur detective looking to uncover her sister's murder, as well as long-buried family secrets. Each chapter transports you to a historical world filled with new clues and plot twists. It contains a lot of gameplay variety, for example, solving puzzles to advance the plot. You have the ability to decorate your own mansion and island, which I love. It also has seasonal content. What I really love about it is that it's very transportive and historical. If you know anything about like the fiction that I write, that is what I love the most, having sort of beautiful visuals. It also allows for creative expression. I mean, who wouldn't like the opportunity to decorate a decadent mansion? And it also stimulates you cognitively because it sort of points out clues so that you get certain details and pattern recognition. You have to use your memory to start piecing together the mystery. And it's also very rewarding because you're sort of like accumulating stars as you progress through the mystery. Discover June's Journey for free. Click the link in the description box or scan the QR code on screen so that you can play on Android, iOS, or PC. Thank you to June's Journey for sponsoring this portion of the video. People without children or experiences with them absolutely might have valid insights, you just don't want to hear it. Yes, I completely agree. Before I became a mom, people would always try to shut down my parenting opinions by saying, you're not a mom, or like, how many kids do you have, ironically. But the thing is with people like that, the goalpost always keeps moving. So let's say when you're not a parent, they will tell you, well, you're not a parent, so you don't get to talk about this. Okay, then you become a parent. They might say, okay, yeah, but your kid is like 6 months old. You don't have a right to have an opinion on this yet. Okay, fair enough. My kid is now 10 years old. Okay, but you only have one child. You don't know what it's like for people who have 2 children. Okay, great. I just had my second child. Okay, but you have 2 girls who don't have any disorders. You don't have 2 boys with ADHD like I do. You see what I'm saying? Like, for people who just want to shut you up, they're going to find a way to keep moving the goalposts so that they say, you have no right to speak on this. But we all have biases. Child-free people, parents, every single one of us has biases. What matters most is not the fact that we have biases, but rather what we do with them, whether we become aware of them and whether we're making coherent logical arguments despite them. It's kind of an ad hominem attack to just tell someone, well, you don't have kids, so you can't touch on this. And actually, I think outsiders often have really important insights to share that maybe people who are in the thick of it can't really see, kind of can't see the forest for the trees. Like sometimes I think with researchers in psychology, for example, they get so specific in one theory that they kind of forget about common sense. Like Mooncat touched on this in her evolutionary psychology video, how there was this one theory that men, how do I say this without getting demonetized? Men give oral relations to women so that they can sense whether another man's sperm is in there, which is like, you are so caught up in this theory that you don't realize the most common sense explanation, which is that it's normal for sexual partners to want to pleasure each other. So like outsiders who are not in the thick of the experience often have very common sense and good arguments to make. And something else I want to mention on this topic, on this idea of like, well, you have this experience, so you need to shut up about it. Ever since becoming pregnant, when I touch on a parenting topic and I say something that somebody doesn't agree with, there is always a comment in my comment section saying, you are clearly biased about this because you're pregnant, so maybe you should stop talking about parenting. How misogynistic is it to tell a woman that because of her reproductive status, she needs to shut up, simply because you don't agree with her perspective? And a lot of the parenting takes that I have, I also had before I got pregnant, before I had a child. So this is not about my reproductive status. Also, I think it's kind of funny that the most recent time this happened to me, I hadn't been pregnant for like 10 weeks. So this person was making all sorts of assumptions about my biases because I'm a pregnant woman when they literally don't know the first thing about me. What I'm trying to say is they try to shut you down if you're not a parent. They try to shut you down if you're pregnant. They try to shut you down if you are a parent. The truth is, these people, they just don't have a counter argument to what you're saying. And they want to shut you up. But because they can't make a logical, coherent argument, they're just going to tell you to shut up. Hot take. Parenting classes should be a legal requirement and free. You're never prepared for your first child. Me and my wife spent the first few years in a near constant panic because we were never quite sure what we were doing was right or how to respond in certain situations. I think I agree with that. You have a huge responsibility to this little person, to keep them alive, to make sure that they're healthy. We have rules around people learning how to drive safely. Why not how to raise a child safely? And we are very lucky that we live in a time where you can easily look up information, but there's also a lot of misinformation. And I wouldn't be surprised if, for example, a lot of foreign governments would start putting misinformation on the internet so that, for example, AI softwares will start to spread misinformation to the masses, and then you have a very unhealthy population. You don't have to maintain relationships with toxic family members or force your child to do the same. Teach them critical thinking, model good morals, and when they are old enough, let them go to family events without you, and afterwards you can discuss how it went for them. Yeah, I agree. Sometimes estranged parents will say like, well, you'll see when you're older, your kids are gonna just do what you did and they're just gonna push you to the wayside. They're not gonna want anything to do with you because that's what you did with your parents. But the thing is, if you are estranged from your parents, the lesson there shouldn't be don't try to resolve conflicts or cut off people who are very important to you over minor things. The lesson there for your children should be if someone is repeatedly bad for your mental health and unable to work through the conflict with you, you have a right to remove yourself from that situation. And so when your kids are older, if you yourself are not healthy for them, they might estrange themselves from you. But otherwise, if you have a very healthy relationship with each other, if your kids learn the lesson, remove yourself from people who are chronically unhealthy and don't seem to be able to change. If you're not like that, they're not going to estrange themselves from you. And I do also agree with this idea that, kids should have as many loving relationships in their life as possible. And sometimes grandparents are gentler with their grandchildren than they were with their children. And so if you yourself don't have a good relationship with your parents, for example, it's possible that maybe your children will have a better one with them. Certainly, it's also possible that it might be an unsafe relationship. But if you deem that it's not an unsafe relationship, then don't meddle in it, don't triangulate, don't try to push these people apart, because your children deserve to have as many loving people in their life as possible. And yeah, just teach them this idea that if somebody mistreats you, here's how you deal with that. Here's how you, number one, try to work through the conflict. And if that doesn't resolve the issue, safely remove yourself. If you are emotionally immature, do not have children or heal yourself before having children. I'm 28 and still trying to get to a point where I can experience an emotion without it completely carrying me away, because my parents never taught me to deal with anything. All I got was be irritated and become irritated with everyone around you, or let your frustration and resentment pile up until you explode at everyone, then never speak of it again. It's a nightmare. So, Katie, I know you say that you are emotionally immature, but I actually think this, what you wrote here, is the mark of a very mature person. It shows a lot of self-insight. It shows that you recognize what you need to work on, and you're setting the intention that you're not going to let it harm the people around you. We are all works in progress. We all get irritated sometimes. We all struggle to regulate our emotions sometimes. Obviously, I don't know you. I'm sure you have struggles for you to say this, but don't be too harsh on yourself, because the way that you're talking about this is actually very mature, and I do agree with your sentiment here. When you become parents, you no longer will be lovers with your partner. You will be first mom and dad. If you are lucky, you won't lose yourselves on the way. I disagree. I think that this is often what happens for people, so I guess you could say it's like normal in that sense. But I don't think that it is healthy. And I also don't think you're doomed to experience this. Maybe this is a little bit of a hot take. You should never put your relationship with your children above your relationship with your partner. Unless, of course, your partner is mistreating your children, in which case, kick them to the curb. What I'm talking about here is more like neglecting your romantic relationship, because parenting requires a lot of you, because it takes up a lot of your time and mental energy and attention. I don't think that we're doomed to experience that. Your children are in the household with you for 18 years, but after those 18 years, what happens when you have an empty nest? Are you going to be living with somebody who you have neglected a relationship with? You're still hopefully going to have many, many decades of life with this person. You don't want to be meeting all your needs from your relationship with your child, because your child, if they have a healthy development, they're going to spread their wings and fly away. And there's going to be grief in that no matter what, but you want to still be left with your romantic relationship if you have one. Or what if, God forbid, something happens to one of your children or to all of your children? Are you then left with nothing? And also, it is really important for kids to see their parents keeping the spark alive, continuing to express passion for each other, to invest in each other, to not take each other for granted, because what they see in their parents, they're probably going to repeat in their own relationships. Most healthy eating advice for kids is upside down. Instead of teaching them to obey food rules, I believe we should focus on food literacy, helping kids explore, understand, and even question what's on their plate from the very first bite. Real food literacy means letting kids try bold, real flavors, even ones adults find challenging. When children have agency and curiosity at the table, they grow up less picky, more resilient, and more open to truly healthy options, not just what's safe or familiar. In my view, compliance, just eat this because I say so breeds anxiety, rebellion, or bland eating habits. But exploration builds the confidence and flexibility that underpins real lifelong healthy eating. I wish more parents and experts would frame food as a chance for self-discovery, not just nutrition or obedience. I really love that, and I completely agree. And I actually think a lot of the reason why children sort of avoid healthy foods, like nutritionally dense foods like vegetables, is because they're unconsciously getting the message from their parents that those foods are like icky or gross or not as tasty. I love cooking with a ton of vegetables. I love having a ton of fruits as snacks. And I would hope that when I start to feed my child, I call it human food. That should tell you how I see babies and cats as interchangeable. When I start to feed my child adult human food, I hope to instill the message that like, these vegetables, these fruits, they're so yummy, they're so tasty, they're so flavorful. Here's how to put them in a meal that works really well together. And I also think that being like what's called a granola mom, or no, almond mom, being like an almond mom who forbids entire food groups is only going to have like a forbidden fruit effect for children. And they're just going to hide those behaviors when they come into contact with like unhealthy foods, and they're just going to eat them in greater quantities because they feel like the scarcity towards them. So I completely agree that like balance is important, exposure to a wide range of foods is important, and also framing food as like an opportunity for connection with other people, an opportunity to be creative, figure out what you like and dislike in the world. So completely agree. I think that's a wonderful take. Grandparents aren't the best care or advice givers. They are, however, some of the best boundary violators. I think that can often be the case, especially because standards of parenting are always evolving and we're always learning more based on new research. And sometimes I think grandparents give advice to new parents that has already been debunked. And all it takes is like a quick Google search to be like, hey, this is actually the complete opposite of what's currently recommended. And yeah, unfortunately, grandparents can also often be boundary violators if they disagree with a parent on their parenting rules and they don't have a sense of respect for them as parents. I don't think that's always the case, but I think there is a little bit of an epidemic with that going on. I will say though, I know that sometimes particularly new moms are very, very touchy with like receiving advice from other people on their parenting. And that's something that like even now that I'm a mom, I don't quite understand. You know, like when somebody around me, maybe like a woman who's older in my life, tells me, oh, actually, you should try burping your baby this way, or have you tried these drops for gas pain? I don't really take that personally. I don't see it as an attack on my identity as a mother. I feel like when moms do that, it usually reflects some sort of defensiveness or like touchiness around their identity as a mom. They usually see their identity as a mom as like very, very central to their life. And if anyone gives them advice, they think it's like this affront, like what you're saying, I can't parent my own child. It's not always like that. You know, sometimes older generations do have good advice to give. Is it good advice? Is it like currently what's recommended, what's evidence-based, and how is it packaged? Because most of the time I have no issue with like people giving me advice, and even if it's not evidence-based, I'll just tell them, well, actually that's not evidence-based. But other times there are a few people who just package it in like a very patronizing way, like you don't know what you're doing. And in those situations, it's like, back off, right? Like, back off, dude. Like recently, my husband and I were traveling with our baby. He was checking out of the hotel. I had gone to the bathroom. And apparently, the hotel concierge was giving him a lot of advice on our own baby. Our baby had started sort of fussing, and she was like, it's the baby's stomach. And my husband was like, well, no, actually, it's not. And then other times she would say, the baby's hungry. And my husband was like, well, actually, you know, I know what's going on. This is gas pain. Like, I don't think it's hunger. But she was just very insistent that like she knew what our baby needed more than he did. And she would just like give him instruction after instruction until I got back to the bathroom. And like, by the time we left, he was like really annoyed. And actually, before we left, we traded places. So like I was with the baby, he went to the bathroom. And obviously she started giving me all this rapid fire advice. And I could just tell, I was like, she holds her identity as a mother very central to her. And I was like, do you have kids? And turned out she has 4 kids. Oldest one was like 20, youngest one was 3 years old. So she was both an established mom and a new mom. And I didn't take it that personally. My husband was a little bit more annoyed with her unsolicited advice, but For me, it was kind of just like an opportunity to see like this person really feels like she is a mother first and foremost. She handles that in a pretty condescending way where she acts like she knows about people's babies better than they themselves know. So I think sometimes you just got to keep that in mind with grandparents or people who are trying to give you advice on their children. Like if they are packaging it in a condescending way, it's usually because they themselves feel parenthood is very central to their identity and maybe they have a little bit of insecurity around that. Once you voluntarily bring a new life into this world, you owe them everything. All your time, your energy, your attention, and your love. They owe nothing to you. Whatever you may want from your children, you must earn it. I agree. Children are innocent. They are completely at your mercy. They're the most important responsibility you will ever have because you are setting up the rest of their life. You have a great say in whether they're going to be happy, healthy people. Maybe like one caveat that I sort of disagree with on this is I personally do think, and I'm just speaking for myself here, that I owe my parents to take care of them in old age. Because I have a real soft spot for elderly people. I have a really strong relationship with my grandma, and I think because of that, I think old people are just like the cutest. I love them so much. When I see an old couple being sweet together, it makes me want to cry. When I see old people in pain, it makes me want to cry. So I feel like for me personally, I would always feel extremely guilty if I weren't able to be there for them in their old age. Because that is also a state of dependence. Old people, if they're no longer independent and self-sufficient, they also need a caregiver just like children do. And especially if they took care of you when you were a small child and when you were not able to be independent, then I do sort of think you owe it to them when they're not able to be independent. You can be judgy about other parents when it comes to the health of their children, like parents who drink when pregnant or smoke in the house, etc. Yeah, I think in general I agree, and I think people take this term mom shaming or like parent shaming a little too far to mean that like you can never take a stand against a parent doing something that's harmful to their child. My only caveat would be like sometimes people can expand this definition to be broader than I think it needs to be. Like they'll say, well, you're being unhealthy to your children and maybe what they're judging that person for is actually something very minor. Like, I don't know, what's an example of something minor? I don't know, it's also subjective, right? Oh, here's an example. Like people who judge moms for not being able to breastfeed. Just because breastfeeding has been associated with like healthier outcomes for children, I don't think that necessarily means that we should shame moms who aren't able to do that for whatever reason. My hottest take is I think having more than 4 kids is child abuse. You just simply cannot tend to one of their emotional, social, and maybe even financial needs without neglecting another, even if there's 2 parents. So I don't know if I agree or not, because I grew up as an only child. I can tell you that even just having one child between 2 parents is extremely taxing. It takes up so much time. I can only imagine how after 2, 3, 4 children, it gets more and more and more taxing. I've also heard from people who have 4 kids that it's not much harder than having, say, 2 kids. But if I'm being honest, I think some of the reason behind that is that often the older kids end up being parentified. The parents go, well, okay, now you're like 12 years old. Why don't you take care of your younger sibling? And that's not okay. That's not their responsibility. Their responsibility is to be a kid. Your responsibility is to be the parent. So if you're parentifying any of your children, that's like hard stance, not okay. But I also don't know, like everybody's different. Everyone has different resources. And I could maybe see a situation where 2 parents have more than 4 children and they are able to give their full attention to all of them. But I really don't know. I don't know anyone who has more than 4 kids. Ooh, this one's spicy. I personally do not believe any parent is capable of loving all their children equally. Favoritism is always present if a family has more than one. In families with more than one child, there's always one that's just a little bit more like you, or just a little bit or a lot closer to fulfilling those dreams that you never got around to, or just a little bit easier to deal with. I saw it in my own home. I saw it as a daycare teacher. I saw it as a Head Start teacher. I saw it as a nanny. The favorite may change from time to time, but you will always have one. And if you can't figure out how to hide your favoritism and treat all your kids exactly the same, you should not have more than one kid. This is one that like my emotional instinct is to say like, no, I don't agree with this. But I don't know if I disagree with it, honestly, because I think maybe you can't like your kids equally, but I think you can love them equally. Like this might sound silly to compare cats to children, but I'm a parent, and honestly, I don't think it's that silly. Even growing up, I remember we would have a lot of outdoor cats in Romania, and there were, of course, favorites that I had. Like, there were cats that I would spend more time with, or who were cuddlier, or who I just enjoyed the presence of more. But I always made it a very concerted effort to treat them equally, to show them as much love, to feed them the same amount, to be equally nice to all of them. And I think it's like that with kids too. Yeah, I think if we're being honest, there are going to be some kids that you like more than others. But as their parent, I think you might have that same amount of love for them, and you might still feel that same responsibility to care for them as much and to treat them equally. But yeah, I agree with you that if you can't do that, if you genuinely love one of your kids more or less than the others, that is a problem. And yeah, you should work on that, because favoritism in families can create a lot of triangulation. It can create a lot of complexes for kids. It can sully their relationships with each other, with you, and that's not healthy. Western parents obsess about making their babies and toddlers independent, like that's the pinnacle of human achievement and well-being, and then surprise Pikachu face when the kid isn't responsive to the parents' wishes or doesn't feel deep bonds of familial closeness or obligation come adulthood. You taught them they were alone in the world the minute they exited the womb, mate. What did you expect? I do sort of agree with this. I am inundated with like TikTok content about how to make sure that your kid sleeps through the night, or how to make sure that they're independently playing. And like, while those things are important and parents need a break, I don't think you can really rush it. And I think a lot of these parents that come on TikTok and say like, here's how I got my 3-month-old to sleep through the night for 12 hours straight, you don't actually know that the sleep training is what caused that. I have this hunch that kids are just going to do what they're going to do. They're naturally going to fall into a pattern. And it's not scientific to say that just because you did this one intervention that you know that's what caused them sleeping through the night. It's okay for a 1, 2, 3-month-old baby to still need their parent to comfort them to sleep. They're tiny. They're a baby. Like, they don't know anything of what's going on. Like, they don't need to be that independent at that age. Kids should be allowed to turn down physical affection from an adult for any reason. Yeah, definitely agree. If you teach your kids that they need to give physical affection to anyone, you're basically teaching them their consent doesn't matter. And when they're adults, they're going to carry that into their adult life. And if someone tries coercing them into something, they're not going to know what's wrong with that. They're going to think, this is just love. This is just obligation. Teaching a child to fear hell, strictly follow an ancient text, and believe their parents' religion alone possesses the absolute truth, while all others are wrong, may be the most socially accepted form of child abuse today. I don't know if I would say child abuse, but I agree that it is very wrong and unhealthy. Trying to scare a child by saying you're going to be damned to eternal suffering if you don't do XYZ thing is not a very good idea. And also, I think children are within their own right to decide for themselves what they believe spiritually. And this assumption that like your kids need to believe the same thing that you do is incredibly harmful, and it's not going to work. Like, you know, no matter how much you try to batter these beliefs into your child is still going to hopefully develop critical thinking and think for themselves, and might, when they're old enough, say, actually, I don't think so. Parents absolutely need to teach their kids that life isn't fair from an early age. Children are set up to be a lot happier in life if they don't expect to get everything they want and don't expect to be acknowledged every time it's warranted. Teaching children to value fairness and to try to advocate for fairness without expecting it from others makes for more resilient adults. This was so beautifully put. That last sentence is incredible. I 100% agree. And I think that a lot of the issue with young adults today is that their parents taught them not only that they should aim for a fair world, but that they should expect life to be fair. Life will never be fair. Never. No matter how much you try to make it fair. The nuance there is that you should try to make it as fair as possible. You should advocate for fairness and for justice and for equality, while recognizing that there will be unfair situations, and that you need to cope with that. Because if you go through life thinking that life is going to be fair, you are going to be in so much suffering. You are going to be so mistaken. You don't need to spend the majority of your waking hours with your kids for them to grow up with a healthy attachment. I agree. I think quality is more important than quantity of time spent with your kids. There are stay-at-home parents who are, let's say, not very attuned to to their children, and their children are going to grow up to have insecure attachment. And then there are working parents who are really present and emotionally connected with their kids when they do spend time together, and those kids will be just fine. This like fear-mongering of attachment parenting that like you need to spend every waking hour with them for them to grow up with secure attachment, it's not supported by the research. There's not even a way to methodologically test for that, because how are you going to test that? You're going to put people in experimental groups where they spend 1 to 24 hours a day with their child? Like, that doesn't work. No one's going to do that. It wouldn't be ethical. It wouldn't be approved. And then you would need to assess them again like 20, 30 years later to see their attachment style then. No one's going to create that study. It's not possible. And I think attachment parenting figureheads need to stop pretending like saying you have to spend every waking hour with your child is evidence-based, because it's not. It's okay for kids to be bored. I see too many parents use screen time, for example, as a way to pacify their children in public or at home so they can get things done around the house and be without their children pestering them. Let them be bored. Great things can happen when a child or adult is not constantly consuming media and is forced to create something to occupy them. It's also okay to discipline them when they can't handle being bored without being disruptive. I agree. I was not bored, but just like kind of alone for a lot of my childhood. Like I remember spending the summers in my grandpa's hometown in Romania with my grandparents, where we didn't have Wi-Fi. I mean, we still don't have Wi-Fi there. We didn't have TV for a long time. We still had like an outhouse. And all I really had was my imagination. And that's why I started drawing, I started writing, I started to get creative, I started to throw myself in imaginary worlds. I would brainstorm like my dream house and like what it would look like from a bird's eye view. I've heard the expression, only boring people get bored. And I do agree with it. If you have interesting enough things in here, you shouldn't need constant external stimulation. As for the idea that it's okay to discipline kids when they can't handle being bored without being disruptive, in theory, yeah, I agree. By discipline, I don't mean like corporal punishment or like punish them in any way, really. But I see too many kids these days who have an aversion to being bored and then just throw a temper tantrum when they're not constantly being stimulated. And instead of trying to appease them, the parent needs to set a natural consequence, set a boundary, and explain to them like, we're not budging on this. We're not going to give you XYZ stimulation right now. Here's a pen and paper. Try to spend the next 20 minutes or so finding something to do with it. Thank you for sharing all of your hot takes. Like I said, I didn't think they were actually that hot. I thought they were very reasonable and very good parenting takes. If you have any more or have any thoughts on the ones mentioned in this video, I'd love to hear in the comments. And also, don't forget to discover June's journey for free. Click the link in the description box or scan the QR code on screen. Take care.
Tell me what you need.